The last time I saw my grandmother, I was in a hurry. Isn't that always the way? Life gets loud and it drowns out the quiet, important things. I was 22, convinced the world was a train that would leave without me if I didn't sprint to catch it. She was 80, a steady, gentle station I always assumed would be there, waiting, whenever I decided to get off. That day, the sun was the kind of golden that only exists in late autumn, pouring through her kitchen window and catching the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny fairies. The house smelled of lemons and old books, a scent so uniquely her, it felt like a physical embrace. I'd stopped by to grab a box of my old childhood things she'd been storing. My new apartment was small, and I was complaining about the lack of space, about my demanding job, about the trivial complexities of a life that felt so overwhelmingly urgent. She listened, as she always did, her hands busy washing two teacups that didn't need washing. She didn't offer advice. She just let me talk, her presence a calm anchor in my self-important storm. When I finally wound down, she turned, drying her hands on a checkered towel, and smiled. It was a smile that held every secret I'd ever told her, every scraped knee she'd kissed, every birthday candle she'd watched me blow out. She said, "I made your favorite." She gestured to a tin on the counter. "Oatmeal raisin cookies." I remember groaning playfully. "Ah, Nana, I'm so full from lunch, and I have to get this box across town before rush hour. I'll take a rain check, I promise." The words were so easy, so careless, they fell from my lips without a second thought. A rain check. As if time was a currency we had an endless supply. As if her cookies, her smile, her quiet kitchen were a franchise that would always be open. I gave her a quick, one-armed hug, the box wedged between us. It was a hug full of distraction, my body already angled towards the door, my mind on traffic and to-do lists. Her hug back was firm, full. She held on a second longer than I did. "You drive safe, my sweet girl," she whispered into my hair. "Call me when you get home." "I will," I said, already halfway out the door. "Love you." "I love you more." It was our ritual, our goodbye. But it wasn't, was it? Not a real one. A real goodbye isn't shouted over a shoulder while you're fleeing. A real goodbye is deliberate. You stop. You look into their eyes. You let the moment settle, heavy and sacred. You imprint their face on your soul just in case. I didn't do any of that. I got in my car, tossed the box of my past onto the passenger seat, and drove away. I didn't look back at her standing in the doorway, one hand raised in a wave. I was already gone. I thought I was just leaving her house. I didn't know I was leaving her. I didn't know that the taste of those uneaten cookies would become a phantom flavor on my tongue for years to come, a constant reminder of a gift I'd refused. I had built my entire life on the assumption of next time. I didn't know that the foundation of that assumption was sand and the tide was coming in. That night, I forgot to call. I got home, got distracted by a boyfriend, by a TV show, by the relentless noise of being young and alive. I thought, I'll call her tomorrow. Tomorrow felt like a promise. It wasn't. It was a lie I told myself, a lie I still sometimes wish I could believe. The world didn't end with a bang. It ended with the sound of my phone ringing. Not a dramatic horror movie ring, but the same cheerful, generic trill it always made. It was the next morning. I was in the middle of a spreadsheet, the glow of the screen bleaching the color from my face, my coffee going cold beside me. I saw my mom's picture flash up, and I almost didn't answer. I was busy. I was always so busy. I swiped the screen. Hey, Mom. What's up? My voice was distracted, my eyes still skimming numbers. There was a silence on the other end that was all wrong. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a dense, heavy silence, the kind that comes after an explosion when the sound has been so loud it leaves a vacuum in its wake. Mom, I said again, my focus finally pulling away from the screen. Her voice, when it came, was a thin, shattered thing. It's Nana. 2 words. Just 2 words. And I felt the axis of the planet tilt. My entire body went cold, a flash freeze from the inside out. I couldn't form a sentence. All I could manage was a sound, a small, animalistic, "What?" "She's gone, honey." My mom broke on the last word, and I could hear the tears she was choking on. "She went in her sleep. Dad found her this morning." The words, "she's gone," didn't make sense. They were foreign syllables, nonsense sounds. Gone? Gone where? To the store? On a trip? My brain, in its sheer, terrified self-preservation, scrambled for a logical, living explanation. It refused to process the finality. It was like trying to fit a square block into a round hole in the dark. It wouldn't fit. "No," I said, the word flat and absolute. "No, that's not right. I just saw her yesterday. She was baking cookies." I said it like it was evidence, irrefutable proof that death was a mistake, a clerical error. She was baking cookies. People who bake cookies don't cease to exist. The universe couldn't be that cruel, that random. "I know, baby, I know." My mom was sobbing now, and the sound of it began to crack the icy shell of my denial. The reality started to leak in, not as an understanding, but as a physical sensation. A sinking feeling in my stomach, a tremble in my hands that made me drop my phone. I heard my mom's tiny, distant voice calling my name from the floor. I slid off my chair, my legs unable to hold me. The carpet fibers scratched against my cheek. I curled into a ball on the floor of my sterile, modern apartment surrounded by IKEA furniture and my own important plans. The world had shrunk to this small, suffocating space. And then it hit. Not the grief of loss, not yet. That was too big, too abstract. It was the grief of the last time. The movie of yesterday started playing behind my eyes, but now it was in horrible, glaring HD. I saw every detail I had missed in my hurry. The slight tremor in her hand as she held the teacup. The extra effort in her smile that I had mistaken for simple warmth. The way she had held me that second longer. Had she known? Had some part of her felt it coming? Or was she just an old woman savoring a moment with her granddaughter? I would never know. The not knowing became a torture all its own. The phantom smell of lemon and old books filled my nostrils. The image of those oatmeal raisin cookies sitting in the tin on her counter slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. I had refused her last gift to me. My rain check was now permanently, eternally void. A sound tore out of me, a raw, guttural thing that didn't seem like it could come from a human throat. It was the sound of my own carelessness breaking me in two. I didn't cry for her then. I cried for me, for my arrogance, for my stupid, reckless assumption that there would always be a tomorrow, for cookies and proper goodbyes. I remembered I never called. I had promised to call, and I forgot. Was she waiting? Did she go to sleep wondering why I didn't call, thinking I was angry or that something had happened to me? The questions were like shards of glass twisting in my gut. My last act, my final communication in the story of us, was a broken promise. On the floor, in a puddle of my own selfish anguish, the regret began to take root. It wasn't a gentle sadness. It was a sharp, invasive seed, burying itself deep in the core of who I was. This was the shattering, not just of my grandmother's life, but of my own ignorant world. The foundation of next time had not just crumbled, it had vaporized, and I was falling. In the weeks that followed the shattering, after the funeral flowers had wilted and the casseroles brought by well-meaning neighbors had all been eaten, the real work of grief began. It was a quiet, solitary torture. It wasn't just about missing her. It was about confronting the ghost of the conversation we never had, the one I didn't know we needed to have until it was too late. My mind became a relentless archivist, pulling memories off the shelves of my mind, not to cherish them, but to autopsy them. I'd remember sitting at her feet as a child, stringing beads while she told me stories about growing up during the war. Not the broad strokes of history, but the small, personal details. The taste of powdered eggs, the way she'd mend her stockings until they were more darn than original, the scent of her father's pipe tobacco. I had listened, but had I ever really heard her? Had I ever asked, "What was that like for you? Were you scared?" Or was I just a child, consuming her stories like fairy tales, never connecting them to the resilient, slightly weary woman in the rocking chair? I thought about her hands, how they were always busy, knitting, gardening, kneading dough. They were a map of a long life, veins like gentle rivers, skin as soft and thin as parchment, dotted with age spots I used to call freckles. I remember her teaching me how to thread a needle, her patience infinite as my fumbling fingers failed. "Slowly, my love," she'd whisper. "There's no hurry." I never told her how much I loved her hands. I never held them just to hold them, to memorize their topography. I only ever touched them in passing, in a hug, when receiving a gift. I never said, "Your hands have built a world of comfort for me, and I see the history in them." But the memory that haunted me most, the one that played on a loop in the quiet hours of the night, was from about a year before she died. I was home from college, full of new ideas and a youthful sense of superiority. We were in her kitchen, of course, and I was holding forth on some point of philosophy I'd just discovered, talking about the meaning of life with the arrogant certainty of someone who had just read their first book on the subject. She was quiet for a long time, just listening, wiping the already clean counter. Then she said, so softly I almost missed it, "You know, when you get to be my age, you realize that life isn't about finding one big meaning. It's about collecting all the tiny ones. The smell of rain on hot pavement, the sound of a specific song on the radio, the way the light hits your grandson's hair. That's where God lives, I think, in the details we almost miss." I, in my infinite 21-year-old wisdom, had smiled a patronizing smile. "That's a sweet thought, Nana," I'd said, dismissing a lifetime of hard-won wisdom as a sweet thought. I treated her profound, quiet understanding as a quaint, simple-minded notion. I didn't lean in. I didn't ask her to tell me more about her tiny meanings. I didn't write them down. I just steamrolled right over her truth with my own unproven theories. That was the conversation I needed to have. That was the goodbye that wasn't about death, but about life. I needed a do-over of that afternoon. I needed to go back, put my hand over hers to stop her cleaning, look into her eyes, really look and say, "You're right. Tell me about your tiny meanings. I want to know all of them." The words I should have said weren't grand declarations. They were simple. They were, "Thank you." Not just for the cookies and the presents, but for her patience, for her quiet strength, for showing me that love is often a verb expressed in baked goods and folded laundry and simply being there. They were, I see you, not just as my grandmother, but as a woman. A girl who had lived an entire life before I was even a thought. A person with dreams, disappointments, secrets, and a vast internal world that I had been too self-absorbed to ever truly explore. The regret crystallized into this. I had loved her, but I had failed to honor the full scope of her humanity. I had accepted her love like sunshine, as a natural, constant fact, without ever properly thanking the sun for its trouble. My goodbye, my real goodbye, would have been an acknowledgement, a settling of accounts for the heart. It would have been me saying, I may not have always understood you, but I see now how much you have shaped me. The lessons are in my bones. Your tiny meanings are becoming my own. But I never said any of it. The last real conversation we had was me dismissing her wisdom, and the final physical goodbye was a distracted hug on my way out the door. The chasm between what was and what should have been was now a permanent canyon carved into my soul, and I was forever stranded on one side, shouting all the words I should have said into a silence that would never answer back. Time, as they say, moves on. It has to. The world kept spinning, and my life, against all odds, kept being lived. I changed jobs. I moved apartments again. I fell in love. Properly this time. But the regret of that last day didn't fade. It didn't soften into a gentle, bittersweet memory. Instead, it metabolized. It became a part of my chemical makeup, a silent partner in everything I did. It wasn't a wound anymore. It was a chronic condition, a haunting. The haunting wasn't with ghosts or eerie sounds. It was in the mundane. It was in the scent of oatmeal raisins wafting from a bakery, a scent that would stop me dead in my tracks on a busy sidewalk, my heart seizing for a second before marching on. It was in the sight of an older woman with a kind face and soft, spotted hands, and the irrational, fleeting thought, is that her? That would flicker and die, leaving a fresh ache in its wake. It was in my dreams. Not nightmares, but cruel, perfect simulations of reality. I dream I was back in her kitchen, the sun was golden, and the cookies were on the counter. In the dream, I always knew it was a second chance. I would sit down at the table, I would take a cookie, bite into it, and tell her it was the best thing I'd ever tasted. I would look into her eyes and say all the things I'd stored up. The thank yous, the I see yous, the tiny meanings I'd started to collect. She would smile, and it was a smile of pure, unburdened understanding. And then I'd wake up. The crushing return to a world where that conversation never happened was a fresh grief every single time. The dream was a perfect, beautiful bottle, and waking up was the shattering of glass all over again. The haunting was also in my new relationships. It made me clingy, neurotic about goodbyes. I would over-explain my departures to my partner. I just have to run to the store. I'll be back in an hour. I love you. He'd laugh and say, I know, sweetheart. It's just the store. But he didn't understand. For me, there was no such thing as just a goodbye. Every parting held the ghost of the one I got so wrong. I became a collector of final words, obsessed with making them perfect, meaningful, just in case. I started visiting her grave, not out of a sense of duty, but because it was the only place I could go to have the conversation. I'd sit on the grass, the cold earth seeping through my jeans, and talk to the granite headstone. I saw a cardinal today, Nana. You'd say it was a visitor from heaven. I let myself believe it for a minute. I tried to make your lemon loaf. I used the recipe card you wrote out for me. It burned on the edges and sunk in the middle. I cried over it. I think you'd laugh. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I was in such a hurry. But a headstone is a terrible conversation partner. It gives no answers. It offers no absolution. The silence that greeted my confessions was the same vast, unyielding silence I'd created by not speaking up when it mattered. I was just shouting my words into the void from a different location. They say time heals all wounds. I've learned that's a lie, or at least a profound misunderstanding. Time doesn't heal a loss like this. It metabolizes it. The raw, open wound of immediate grief eventually closes, but it leaves behind a scar. A scar is not healthy tissue. It's tougher, less sensitive, a permanent record of a profound injury. The regret of not saying goodbye is my scar. It doesn't bleed anymore, but I feel it with every change in the weather of my soul. It has reshaped me. I am a different person because of that one afternoon. The careless, hurried woman who left that kitchen died that night with her grandmother. In her place is someone who understands the brutal, beautiful fragility of now. This understanding is the legacy of my regret, the price I paid for it, and the only redemption I can find. I see it in how I parent my own children now. When my daughter wants to show me a drawing for the 10th time, I stop. I look. I get down on my knees and I see the furious, wonderful scribbles and I say, "Tell me about every color." I am collecting her tiny meanings, and in doing so, I am building a fortress of completed moments against the potential of future regret. When my son asks for one more story, even though I'm exhausted, I usually say yes, because I know now that the currency of love is not grand gestures, but the small accumulated interest of time and attention. I am teaching them, through my presence, how to say a proper goodbye to each day, to each moment, by being fully within it. I see it in my other relationships. I am now the friend who calls back. I am the one who says the awkward, heartfelt thing at the end of a phone call. "I'm really proud of you." Or, "That thing you did meant a lot to me." I've become fluent in the language of appreciation because I am so haunted by the dialect of absence I was once comfortable with. I don't let a disagreement fester. I don't assume there will be a tomorrow for an apology. My regret made me brave in the ways that matter most, the ways of the heart. I've even made peace with her grave, in a way. I don't go there to shout into the silence anymore. I go to tend to the scar. I go to report in. I tell her about the person her last lesson forged. I tell her that her tiny meanings are now my family's gospel. I bring my children sometimes, and I tell them stories about the great-grandmother they never met. Not just the sweet, sanitized stories, but the real ones. The story of her resilience, her quiet humor. And, yes, the story of my regret. I tell them so they might learn from my mistake without having to pay the same terrible price. The pain is no longer a constant scream. It's a familiar melody that plays softly in the background of my life. It swells during a sunset that looks like the one from her kitchen, or when I successfully bake a batch of oatmeal raisin cookies that almost tastes like hers, but it's not a debilitating pain anymore. It's a grounding one. It's the touchstone that reminds me of what is truly important. It is the weight that keeps me from floating away on the trivial winds of daily stress. I will never be over it. I will never wake up one day and think, I'm glad I didn't say a proper goodbye. The scar is permanent, but I've learned to touch it not with anguish, but with reverence. It is the proof that I loved someone so deeply that the absence of a single meaningful moment could alter the entire topography of my life. It is the evidence of a bond that not even death could completely sever, because the echo of its breaking still shapes my actions every single day. So, if you were to ask me if I've found peace, I would say yes, but not the kind you might imagine. It is not a peaceful absence of pain. It is a peaceful coexistence with it. The regret broke me, but in the breaking, it made room for a deeper, more intentional kind of love to grow in the cracks. I could not give my grandmother the goodbye she deserved, but I have dedicated my life to giving everyone I love the goodbye they deserve every single day in 1,000 tiny ways. It is my lifelong atonement. And in that, I have found a purpose for the pain. The regret doesn't break me anymore. It built me.